and welcome. The title of today's talk is Punctuality Important in the Spiritual Life? And I'm not going to answer that question. This is something for you to answer. But I'm going to give you some really good reasons this morning to say yes. It's interesting to think about punctuality versus time. We think about, is it important to be on time? Some people don't care if they're on time. Some people, one person in particular I was thinking of a few years ago, really disliked traffic lights. And so he would never pay attention to that red light. And he said he felt like the government was using his time to their benefit and against himself. It's very interesting to even talk to people about what time means to them. But the word punctual, as you're going to learn today, it takes on a different meaning than just being on time. So I think about a couple of stories I'm going to share today. One about a train that was late, and in starting off he was late, a few minutes late, and the chaos, the horrible, and it's a true story, by the way, that took place. People died. A pregnant woman couldn't get to the hospital on time just because they were not punctual. Then I've got another story I'm going to share with you. When I was a teenager, and my dad was teaching me how to play golf, and he taught me what to look for. And one of the two key points, one had to do with punctuality, but in this case it was rhythm, the rhythm of punctuality, how to become a good golfer. So I'm going to share that story with you. And then I was listening to Richard today read about the heart and how we have a heartbeat, and that heart communicates. Was it you, Val? I guess, yeah. Sorry. And how that heartbeat communicates with the universe. So if we take our thinking about punctuality, that it's more than physical, emotional, mental, and take it out into the universe, we realize how important that the planets and the sun are in their punctuality. We think about the 4 seasons. What if winter decided to come early? Well, in some parts of the world, perhaps it does come early. The punctuality of the climate today is not reliable. But anyway, there are 4 levels of punctuality: physical, emotional, mental, spiritual. So that's what I'm going to be talking about today. It always brings me, or a person, joy. It certainly brought me joy when I discovered the teaching. When people discover a teaching that brings joy to them, and they discover a teaching that is not only presents a foundation for understanding the meaning of life, a teaching which brings inspiration, aspiration, and expansion of consciousness, but it also gives them a solid direction, that's joy. That's the Ageless Wisdom teaching. The Ageless Wisdom teaching gives this direction. It's not a dogma, it's not a doctrine, and it's not too old, and it's not too modern. It fits our needs for today. A spiritual teaching that is modern yet filled with ancient wisdom, beautiful and yet practical. It brings joy when living in a cycle of evolution where humanity struggles with chaos. struggles with depression and disappointment, where we experience an imbalance of wealth and poverty and health and sickness. When we are going through these different dynamics of life, to find a teaching which inspires progressive techniques for personal and group unfoldment gives us hope for the future. When a person finds such a teaching, they will have found the Ageless Wisdom teaching. So for me, my heart beats to the rhythm of the Ageless Wisdom teaching. When I find people say to me, well, I can't talk about the Ageless Wisdom to my family. I can't talk about the Ageless Wisdom to my Christian friends. It perplexes me because, like I said, it takes us out of the immersion of focusing on why are we poor, why are they rich, why is he or she sick, and why are they so healthy. It removes all of this divisiveness and questioning and gives us concrete answers in an inspirational way. And this whole process relates to rhythm and punctuality. So let me begin. You're going to learn today how important punctuality is in the whole cosmic design of life. In your personal life, in your family and group life, national and international life, and even life at cosmic levels. That's punctuality. Where most of us have I think, have an instinctual understanding of the importance of being on time. Esoteric students have a more cosmic view of the power of beauty and the power of punctuality, and see it not as a disciplined practice, but part of the synthesis of the Song of God. One night, when a young boy was in the mountains with his father, searching for stars and constellations in the sky, the boy asked his father, "What is God doing there?" The boy's father pondered for a while and then said, "Well, God is a great composer. I guess he is busy composing." As the boy's family were all musicians and daily they performed together at home, it was very easy for this little boy to understand what composing meant. Years have passed. Still, the words of the boy's father were in his mind. Gradually, it dawned in the growing young man's mind that the composer was composing galaxies, zodiacs, solar systems, kingdoms, angelic kingdoms and hierarchies, plants, flowers, animals, birds, and men. All these were God's compositions, and the young man came to believe that God is continuously composing his symphonies and melodies and then playing them back in space. Yet we do not need to go to the stars to admire God's compositions. We look at a singing bird, a colorful fish, a flower, or even a human being, and we see what a great talent or artistry and science that this great composer has. We can imagine all the stars and globes as musical notes. Just think about this. Imagine all the globes, all the stars as musical notes. And realize that the symphony in space should be created as precisely as a musical symphony on Earth, having precise space and precise timing in its motions. I've always believed the reason for the popularity of astrology, if approached with the right understanding, is because it brings an awareness of the punctuality of cycles. Cycles that start at birth and continue through the end. Esoteric astrology goes beyond the basic cycles, demonstrating the response or lack of response to the awakening human soul, from physical to emotional to mental and to spiritual. For example, during a Saturn cycle at the age of 14 or 15, a person, if their life is punctual with the rhythm of the emotional body, they are punctual with the rhythm of the emotional body. If they are awake, if they are in rhythm, at this time, 14 or 15, they give birth to their emotional body when they're 14 or 15. This is a Saturn cycle. If they are punctual and reach the age of 51, they will give birth to their mental body. However, such births are often delayed, and we discover a 50-year-old whose consciousness remains frozen in their emotional body, or an 80-year-old whose consciousness is totally identified with the physical body. Somewhere along the way, the person's consciousness ceased to expand. They were not on time, losing the synchronicity of the plan for their soul. We all have a physical, emotional, and mental body. Each body must be clearly tuned to one another as musical instruments tuned to each other in the orchestra. If the cycles for these bodies are not played as musical notes in time with the whole composition of the soul, there's going to be what? Chaos. The physical body has punctuality, as does the emotional body and mental body, and you can see this in your astrological chart, or you can see this through your observation. Or a psychologist can, if they have the sensitivity to these kind of cycles, will recognize the awakening or the deterioration and these three bodies being out of punctuality with the rhythm of the soul of their life. There is also spiritual punctuality, which I'll talk about a little bit later. I remember one day when I was with my father on the golf course, we were watching different people tee off from the first hole. He told me to observe the rhythm of each person's golf swing and to observe how the most synchronized player would be the most successful. So I watched each player. I could see where two players were in such a hurry that they addressed the ball and swung without any precision or sense of timing. One completely missed the ball. The other one lost his ball in the lake. Another spent such a long time moving and adjusting his arms and legs and his body just so, then adjusting the golf club just so, then trying to measure the distance between the green and the tee, and through this whole detailed process. It was so slow that he lost the natural rhythm, completely failing to connect the club to the ball. Well, I really had to stifle my laughter, not wanting to be disrespectful of my elders. The player then, of course, delayed all of the rest of us that were waiting to tee off. But one player, I could still see him in my mind. He was so natural in the manner in which he walked up to the tee. He addressed the ball, he checked the direction of the wind, noted the terrain, and putting green. He took one practice swing and hit the ball. It was a par 3 hole. It landed on the green. He made it seem so effortless. Afterwards, he smiled at me and gave me a wink and left. There was precision, there was rhythm, there was synchronization in the way he placed and played the game. It was so beautiful. All the notes of the cosmic symphony are arranged precisely to make our emotions punctual and to create synchronization. The highest responsibility of a human being is to play their part precisely in punctuality and synchronization with the rest of the notes. Unless they are precise and punctual, they will create disturbances in the symphony of life. So like the young man that felt like the government was controlling him, and he was going to run a red light and push that yellow light, and this creates disturbances, right? But he thought it created his freedom. So to understand punctuality is to understand freedom. It is not running a red light to think that you have total freedom. In an orchestra, any delayed note or early note creates being played. A delayed note or a early note that's being played by one of the musicians in the symphony is going to cause chaos. It must be precise. I used to think, because I played a lot, I was a professional musician for a long time, and I was so grateful not to be a drummer. Especially the kettle drum. Oh my God. I can remember in one concert where the kettle drummer did not play that note at the right time. It's like the entire symphony orchestra became paralyzed, and the conductor just stood there. It was just like that moment in time where everything was frozen, and then we went on, and the kettle drummer got fired. The musicians must be punctual, play all their notes on time. All instruments must be played and synchronized according to the lead of the conductor. If someone comes in early or late, it will destroy the whole beauty of the music. So punctuality involves one with all that exists. These things are not taught in our churches and schools today. We must try to bring these things to the awareness of our children and schools and churches. We must teach them that punctuality is a basic factor of survival. I was thinking about a program that I was watching the other day on television, a documentary about different Indian nations that live in Arizona and Wyoming. These are the two documentaries that I was watching, and then there was another documentary that I watched in Alaska. Very fascinating, and the video producer took us to areas that were off the grid, where people wanted to get away from the city, away from the community, and just live off the grid, live, on their own. And they were all about freedom. And yet the irony is they all came together, worked together, created their gardens together, chopped wood together, all because the seasons, right, and the elements, and I won't go into it all, I won't have time, but they called that freedom. And yet they were living a rhythmic life, a life of punctuality. They just didn't recognize it. It was so interesting. The Symphony in Space is based on these three fundamentals. Precision, that's the first fundamental. The second is punctuality, and the third is synchronization. The Symphony in Space is based on these three fundamentals: precision, punctuality, and synchronization. All instruments must be clearly tuned to each other. Each player must be punctual and on time, and all must synchronize, be in sync, right? We tend not to use the word synchronize, but in sync. If these three fundamentals are not there, there's going to be chaos. So these are three fundamentals that we want to keep in our mind today as we answer this question: is punctuality important in the spiritual life? When I was a violinist and performed in various symphony orchestras, to meet these three fundamentals in performance, it required many hours of practice to present the most beautiful performance to the audience. You can imagine, as disciples, each of us as musicians of life, applying the teaching each day. So the fundamentals of the teaching that allow us to use these three fundamentals, to be precise, to be punctual, to be in sync, is meditation, study, and service. So you see how the three work together. Then we take the effects of our studies into the group work, refining and polishing ourselves in the light of the beauty of the group. The highest responsibility of a disciple is to find their right place in the symphony of life and to play their part precisely in punctuality and in synchronization with the rest of the notes. Unless the disciple is precise and punctual, they're going to create disturbances in the symphony, and the wheel of life will throw them back out into space as a turning wheel does that has a patch of mud on it and throws it off. There's a story in the teaching which explains a situation where a train was a half an hour late, and a poisoned man died on the train because he could not be taken to the hospital in time. A young man lost $5,000 because he could not sell his jewels to a merchant who did not want to wait more than 30 minutes at the station. A pregnant woman had extreme difficulty on the train because she could not be taken immediately to the hospital. the train was late. So the driver wanted to speed. He reached the tracks intersection before the mechanic had changed their direction and the train went south instead of east. Thousands of people were frustrated at the station, waiting for their friends and relatives. They spent time, they spent money and energy to find out what had happened to the train. Because the train was on the wrong track, it crashed into the other train coming from the opposite direction, which was 10 minutes early on its schedule. Interesting, isn't it? That's chaos. So a great mess was created because of the lack of punctuality. I heard on the news just the other day, 2 large airliners in the sky, 10 minutes away from crashing into one another because they were not on track with their time. Fortunately, the pilot in the one plane diverted the death of lots of people. So these are dramatic stories, but it makes its point about punctuality in ways that we might not consider as we view punctuality in our own wheel of life. As I was reading about this story about the train, I was thinking about activities in our group life, White Mountains group life, our community, and the service that asks us for punctuality. For example, committee work. During each annual conference, there is one committee in particular whose members easily must rely on one another for things like to purchase food, and then later to help set out that food and the snacks every day, refresh the flowers, as well as to meet at the beginning and the end of the conference to set up and take things down. If someone does not show up or comes 30 minutes late, this then causes problems for the rest of the committee members. And I know one person can nod her head, yes, because we know about these things, we have these experiences. I remember when my teacher would call a membership meeting, a meeting where some of us had to drive over an hour to get there, how we all had to plan to get there early in case we ran into traffic jams. We knew if we were late, we were going to be disciplined in some way. There was a well-known incident during an annual fall conference where many people were late because of construction taking place in the small town of Sedona, Arizona, where the conference was being held. Some folks attending the conference that morning arrived over 30 minutes late. But more than 90% of the people in attendance did get there on time. Why? Because they had planned for possibilities and left their lodging or their home to get there 30 minutes ahead of time. 30 minutes ahead of time. When the people showed up late, the teacher was so angry, he admonished everyone, late or not, where he talked about the importance of punctuality, of getting to the meetings on time. And he explained there are no excuses for being late. He frequently fined those who were late $50. Everything had a message. Everything was symbolic. Unless you didn't have the eyes to see and the ears to hear. Punctuality involves one with all that exists. Many messes happen because of a lack of punctuality. In a human being, all parts of their body and all systems, centers, and glands must be punctual in our duties or our interactions with each other in order to maintain our health and happiness in the body. All of us are supposed to function according to the programming put in our genetics and in our permanent atoms, which is also part of our genetics. Everyone in a family must exercise punctuality toward the other family members if the family is to be prosperous, healthy, and happy. But the problem of punctuality does not end with the family. The family is related to something greater, right? To the community, to the nation. Every family must be punctual toward national duties, rules, regulations, responsibilities, demands, and needs. Our social and national relationships are based on punctuality. Punctuality can also be explained by a temple dance in which everyone has certain movements to perform. The music controls the movements, and if the dances are not punctual or do not move at the right beat, the dance will be out of order. I think of the years during our conferences when one of us would teach those of us that could dance some of the Gurdjieff dances, and how precise and how rhythmic every step, every movement, every arm movement, every body movement had to be to synchronize with the music. This is a punctuality that comes from the inside and meets the music on the outside. This is rhythm. And how hard those dancers worked. They practiced and practiced and practiced, and where the rest of us were enjoying our hikes out in nature, they were in the room practicing the rhythm to be together with one another. Just like the musicians in the symphony orchestra, because one kettle drummer or one person dancing in that group, if their arm was up and everyone else's arm was down, it didn't really cause chaos, it caused snickering in the audience, and then we felt sorry for the person, and the person felt devastated. But what that means is that we must learn to train ourselves to understand the beauty, the preciseness, the punctuality, and the synchronization that takes place to even walk in beauty, to talk in beauty, to think in beauty must all be based on these three fundamentals: preciseness, punctuality, and synchronization. When a person engages in right thinking and meditation, he creates focus, intensity in his mental thinking. It is this tension, then, that attracts spatial energy. Just like I was thinking of playing a musical instrument, say the violin, when you have the right tension on those four strings, it would reverberate in such a way that you could hear harmonics. And what happens with right thinking and meditation, the tension that right meditation and right thinking and meditation creates is a tension that brings forward inspired thinking. It brings a energy from space, let's say from the cosmic magnet, that inspires the atomic structure of your nature in such a way that your mind becomes strengthened and puts you now in contact with higher sources of knowledge. It's a very real thing. More energy is absorbed in our system through deeper and prolonged meditation. Expansion of consciousness follows intense thinking. Because why? This psychic energy is absorbed in our consciousness, and when the consciousness encompasses more psychic energy, it expands and has greater contact with more space. Spatial energy builds the link between the lower and the higher mind. Because of this link, abstract ideas can be translated into thoughts that can help people advance on their path. So let us consider punctuality in relation to a group. A group is a living, advancing mechanism. A true group is a living, advancing mechanism, just like a human being. The board, the committees, the members of the group can function at optimum efficiency if there is synchronization between them. The purpose of the group and the punctuality of their action will find them in sync, in synchronization with one another. Simply stating, the group's purpose is basically to strive toward the perfection of Christ, right? When we put everything aside, all the activity, all the complexity, all the actions that take place in organizing and working together as a group mind, is to strive toward the perfection of Christ. So what is needed to synchronize ourselves to that purpose? And this is where spiritual punctuality comes in. Spiritual punctuality alongside mental punctuality, emotional punctuality, and punctuality in actions. So spiritual punctuality is the punctuality of prayer and meditation. Prayer and meditation, spiritual punctuality. Mental punctuality is the punctuality of study and research and synchronization with the spiritual directions gained through meditation and prayer. Spiritual punctuality, mental punctuality. Now, emotional punctuality is the ability to synchronize with the lofty thoughts and visions created by prayer and meditation and study. You see what's happening now? This is the preciseness, the punctuality, the synchronization through spiritual punctuality, mental punctuality, emotional punctuality. Punctuality in action is the ability to put into action lofty thoughts and feeling created by meditation, study, and aspiration. So, the living mechanism of a group entity, each cell, organ, and system does its proper duty at the right time, at the right place, and with the right purpose. This is punctuality. This is preciseness. This is synchronization. This creates such a powerful force on the path of the evolution of the planetary life. When I asked a person a question via email a while ago, I asked her, when will this be done? And she said, soon. And I asked her, what does soon mean? See, soon doesn't fall into the pattern of preciseness and punctuality and synchronization. Soon is a colloquial statement for a person who's relaxed into their own schedule, their own timing. And she's sitting right here, and she's laughing, so I guess it's okay to talk about it. Yeah, we learn from each other, don't we? We really do. Certain people feel imposed upon or under pressure when you talk about punctuality. They say, well, how can we relate freedom and imposed punctuality? Just like all these communities that moved off the grid back into their own grid. Interesting. Or they think, if I'm really punctual, don't I lose my own freedom and my own will to act the way I want? Punctuality starts with losing your freedom and ends with gaining it. Eventually, we realize that the sooner we enter life's rhythm, the better it is for us. It's like in astrology, we read in the Tibetan's teachings about Saturn cycles, and he says that Saturn cycles are the disciples' cycles. It's so interesting if you know how to measure these Saturn cycles in your chart and relate them to your life. It makes you increasingly sensitive to and aware of what's going on around and about you during that time frame. And you begin to recognize the test that you're going through during this Saturn cycle is like an echo of an earlier Saturn cycle to teach you how much you learned or how much you didn't learn. And if you didn't learn, then this cycle is more tough, more intense, more difficult. So you want to be in synchronization with these astrological cycles, so that when you're in synchronization, you eventually find your steps leading you to freedom. See, now your soul is in synchronization with the plan and its purpose. We're no longer a slave to trial and error. So freedom can be achieved through punctuality, or the lack of punctuality eventually makes us a slave. Punctuality is not a discipline of restriction or imposition. On the contrary, punctuality is a moment of release and expansion and synchronization with the rhythm of life. In punctuality, we make a breakthrough and enter into the labor of a greater whole. Punctuality is not only related to time or timing, but also to space, which would be location, forms, which is man or object, energy and purpose. Punctuality in time means that you must be precise in your timing. I was just thinking that our recent issue of Agni Yoga Quarterly has a beautiful article in there about time. If you haven't gone to that issue, go to White Mountain's website, go to the menu where it has Agni Yoga Quarterly, and go to the July, August, September issue. It's, you'll learn a lot. Punctuality means that you must be precise in your timing, neither late nor too early. If you are late, you disturb people. For example, if you are late to a meeting, you cannot play your role. You impose yourself on others. If you're late to a group meeting, you disturb the group's aura, concentration, and focus, and evoke unpleasant forces from those who did not like to see you late. The same is true for the leadership. If the leadership says, be here at 7 p.m., and that leader keeps you waiting for an hour, you're going to become agitated. Or if the meeting is to last from 7 to 8 p.m., and the leader keeps you there until 9:30, what's going to happen? A lack of punctuality in attending meetings shows that there are certain gaps in your consciousness, and there's certain mechanisms in your being are not punctual in their operation. It shows that you need psychological and physical alignment. Punctuality tells us that no person can live for themselves. They must live for the oneself. They are responsible to the oneself for all their actions. So I'm ready to close this, but I just had to share this one story. I will never forget it. The image is in my mind. In one of the documentaries, this young man was a Mennonite, and he left the community and moved. I don't remember some in the somewhere in Alaska, and he had like 2 acres that he lived on all by himself, almost all by himself. He had horses. He had dogs, no electricity, no water. He had a natural, lakes and things like that. It was beautiful. But he had to keep those horses fed. He had to keep those dogs fed. He had to keep those horses exercised. He had to keep those dogs healthy. So he was working for the oneself in those horses and in those dogs. Now, is not what kept, the image in my mind. The image was, he must have been a monkey in another lifetime, or even a gorilla, because he showed us how he would climb a tree, and he would go out to the branch and swing himself from this branch over to the branch of another tree, and go from that branch over to this other tree, and then go out to the end of that branch that would lower, 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 until he was back on the ground. Then he would jump up on his horse, and he said, this is how I like to dismount. And he would do a backflip off the horse. And he was like this child, this teenage kid, probably maybe more of a 3-year-old. I don't know of a teenager that would do that unless they were a gymnast or from a circus. Anyway, he was a delight, and he was so in love with God and Jesus. His God was a personal God, and Jesus always spoke to him. But he was still in rhythm. He was still working for the beauty of Jesus, for the love of God, and taking care of those horses. He just didn't have to deal with the rest of us humans. So let me close with this, that punctuality teaches us that every human must live with a sense of responsibility. They must exercise punctuality in their duties and responsibilities and in relation to the demands and needs of life as a whole. So if you ever have time to watch some of these documentaries on YouTube, and you're frustrated with the poor quality of movies these days, and YouTube videos are free. Yeah. Anyway, so thank you for listening today, and hopefully you found an answer to the question, is punctuality important in the spiritual life?